All right, we are in Matthew 11, and I'm actually going to do the beginning at 12. One of the things you notice as you read through the Bible is they put in the chapters afterwards, and sometimes they're not in the most logical spots. Sometimes they're in terrible spots. So I think we ran into one in Genesis where it starts chapter 2, like clearly in the middle of a thought, and it needs to go down like 2 lines before you start the next chapter. But I think that sort of happens here, where the beginning of chapter 12 kind of fits better with the end of 11. So we'll cover those together. But rather than try to do all of it in one big video, we'll do a couple. So here we are, John the Baptist in jail. Some of his followers come to Jesus and say, "Are you really the guy?" And Jesus says, "Yes, yes, I really am the guy," right? But interestingly, more so is his response kind of to the Pharisees and the religious people of the day. He started speaking to the crowds and he says, "What did you go out in the wilderness to see?" All right. Did you go out to see a reed swaying in the wind, meaning somebody, something simple and just sort of goes with the way of the culture? Uh, did you go out to see a man dressed in soft clothes? Right. See those who wear soft clothes are in royal palaces. Kind of a rebuke, right? Um, and then there's been a lot of, if you're online in some of these debates, and I'm in like a lot of pastor debates online on X and different things. And there's been a lot of debate about masculinity, what makes masculinity and how and whatever. So this is Jesus a little bit sort of saying, "Hey, did you go out to see someone that gets blown about by the day, someone that doesn't really stand up? Did you go out and see someone dressed in soft clothes? No, you didn't. You went out to see John barking at people, wearing camel hair and eating bugs." Um, right? But he was a prophet, right? And more than a prophet. And that basically this is Jesus confirming that John the Baptist was sent to fulfill prophecy. And he says that's in Malachi, is down here where it says he is the Elijah to come. Malachi basically prophesies that Elijah will come in the future. So in the Passover festival, the Jewish Passover festival, they leave a seat for Elijah's thing, assuming he's going to come. So, and basically what Jesus is saying is, it's not actually Elijah. What you're saying is, an Elijah figure is coming, and it was John the Baptist that's come to do that. Let anyone who has ears listen, right? This verse 11 here gets a little bit challenging, but basically, this is you're in like this window, right, where Jesus is here. When he dies on the cross is when his full ministry is sort of in place, the full kingdom arrives. So you've got this tiny, very short window where Jesus is alive in history, right? Um, so, and that's what he's talking about here, just sort of saying like all the prophets up until John have been beaten and thrown about, and John will as well, right? Um, but the kingdom of heaven has is at hand, and that's what all those people died for, right? And then he goes in and sort of says, "Hey, look, this is an unresponsive generation." This is what he's saying. John the Baptist came, he preached to you, and you didn't listen. Now I'm coming here, and you're still really not listening to me. And this little quote here is it's a game, basically, sort of like Simon Says to a certain extent, I guess, um, is the comparison that I've heard. But we played the flute for you, and you didn't dance, and we sang a lament, and you didn't mourn. You're supposed to, I guess, when the person pretends to play the flute, you have to dance, or and when you sing, they have to mourn, that type of thing. So it's kind of a Simon Says game, and if they don't do it, then you're not supposed to, or whatever, right? Um, but Jesus is making a point here at the end, and he's sort of saying, "Look, John the Baptist came, and he was spitting fire and eating bugs, not eating or drinking, and they say, 'Oh, this guy's demon possessed.' And then Jesus comes, and he's a lot more peaceful, and he's healing people, and he's ministering to the poor and lost, and they're like, 'Oh yeah, that guy's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors.'" Basically, Jesus is kind of making the point, like, it doesn't matter who the messenger is. You guys are rejecting the word of God. And he says, "Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds," right? That's hearkening back to Proverbs. Proverbs has a lot of wisdom personification as a person, but particularly chapter 8, which favorite. I don't really have a favorite verse. I've got a favorite chapter. Proverbs 8 is very cool. But the way most people sort of interpret that is wisdom was at Jesus's side, and it makes some sort of parallels to basically be like, this is sort of Jesus by God's side at the creation of all things with order and bringing in wisdom. So, sort of a cool chapter. But, anyways, that's what that is. Yeah, wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. It's just hearkening back to Proverbs to sort of say, hey, look, you'll know us by our fruit, which he is just about to go into, right, in a couple of seconds. So, but before he does that, he denounces some of the towns that don't repent. So, woe to you, Chorazin. Woe to you, Bethsaida. If the miracles that were done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. So, Tyre and Sidon are very sort of famous towns. They are right on the border of the Holy Land. Depends on whose interpretation you take, whether they're actually part of the Holy Land or not. But they are fairly famously rebellious in their way. So there are times, the king of Tyre actually sends some wood down for the temple and different things like that. There's times where you're sort of allies, but they have always worshipped foreign gods, despite being either in or on the edge of the Holy Land. So that's what he's sort of pointing out. And he's like, look, those guys have always been rebellious. It's going to be worse for you because you get to see Jesus in person and you're not doing it. So, and this is like in a lot of discussion and debates as well about, how does God treat nations, or in this case, he's just talking communities, but he does seem to give a certain level of corporate responsibility to say, hey, these people are going to be judged. And I think, much of that is just that if you are an unrepentant, in this case, town, community, nation, whatever it is, you're bringing that curse upon yourself because, right, you're an unresponsive generation. So the fact that your parents are not believing is going to influence the fact that your kids, it's like a snowball effect that sort of goes there. So that judgment is upon those people in that town. Obviously, could you be saved if you're in that town? Obviously, Jesus isn't saying, wow, everyone there is just going to be automatically destroyed, but they are being cursed from the point of view of how they have to live and where they're living, right? So the next piece right here is at that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, because this was your good pleasure. All things have been trusted to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and any to whom the Son desires to reveal him. So, one, pretty clear, the only way is through Christ, right? It sort of goes through. But it filters into this right here to say, come to me, all of you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light, right? This is one of those sort of paradoxes in Christianity, is what he's not saying that you won't be yoked. He's not saying you won't have a burden, right? But what he is saying is, if you want to take on the lordship of Christ, if you want to take on this burden, if you want to take up the cross and follow me, what you will find is this extra burden that you take on with lordship by carrying your cross is actually going to be light. Right. So it's this paradoxical thing to say, like, most people think it's easy not to believe in Jesus. It's easy not to make him Lord of your life and have all of these extra thoughts and concerns and worries and stuff. But what that does is it produces in you an actual lightening of your burden, which is just this amazing thing, right? So he's sort of saying, hey, like, you take up this extra responsibility, you take on this extra duty. That's the best way. I think the best way of defining. You're taking on an extra duty to a new Lord and King of your life. And by taking on that extra duty, you actually end up reducing your load because he's going to help carry it with you, right? If you are on your own and you have all these duties, you then say, I'm going to submit to this king. In some ways, you have to submit to the king. In other ways, that king is there to protect you, right? That king will actually lighten your burden by being obedient to him. and it will actually reduce your load. So his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Now that, and this is where I say I'm going to keep these together, transitions right into chapter 12, because one, the Sabbath is a very similar circumstance, right? Um, and it's also the Sabbath is a day of rest, right? So my yoke is easy, my burden is light, and he transitions immediately into Sabbath, which is a rest day, right? But Sabbath is a gift that God gives us, right? And that gift is that we must not work on that day. So he's putting an extra duty, an extra burden on us to say, make sure that you accomplish everything in your other days because you are not supposed to work on this day. Set aside one day just for me where you're not working, where you're not at the grind, right? That's another requirement that you're putting on top of me, God. Can you believe that? But he phrases it as a gift. This is a gift I give to you that you have this, right? And what it is once you start practicing the Sabbath, once you start saying, I need to set aside time for God, right? He deserves this. He needs time where I am not at the grind all the time. You find it is a gift, right? That the Sabbath is actually a gift to you to celebrate him. You're celebrating, as we were talking about with the ordered creation, right? You're celebrating creation through God. By being obedient to God, you're actually celebrating creation, right? There's talk of applying that Sabbath sort of idea even to fields and other things like that. There needs to be a time of rest built into your life, right? And that's actually a gift. And God designs it to say you need to have that rest. You need to do that rest. But when you actually take on the burden of saying, I have to set aside this day, you actually realize, wow, what a gift that is that God has given us to do that, right? So then this is the Sabbath story. They're walking through, they pick some wheat, right? Um, and those that are there are unhappy, right? See, your disciples are doing what's not lawful. And Jesus goes through and he gives some examples of saying, look, this is in the past, in the Old Testament, where people, in theory, broke the Sabbath laws. But that's silly, right? Because you don't even understand. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, right? You would have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, right? And in another place, the way he words it, I really like is the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? The whole point of Sabbath is to have rest in God, right? And then he moves on, and another example of the same principle that's going on, right, is he heals a man and he sees a man with a shriveled hand. One, uh, just finer point, but this shriveled hand, the way that they would look at this is actually an act of creation because he's not just healing what was well. He's basically sort of an act of creation to bring about a new hand. So the fact that that happens from Jesus is pretty important. But beyond that, they say, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And he's like, basically, like if you had a sheep fall in a ditch, you're not going to leave it there overnight, right? You're going to pull it out, and that was lawful in the Sabbath laws. But what was unlawful for many rabbis, most rabbis, is you can't tie a bandage or set broken bones on the Sabbath because that's work, right? So you can't set the broken bone of your son, but you can pull the sheep out of a hole, right? And Jesus is just pointing this out, like you're worth more than sheep, right? So it's lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath. So what he's saying is you're setting aside time for God, right? But that doesn't mean the world stops turning. But you can do good. You might have people over to celebrate with them, to provide hospitality. That means you're going to have to cook a meal, right? So the point is not you can't crack an egg and put it in a pan, right? That's not what he's saying with Sabbath. What he's saying is set aside time. And if that time is providing hospitality for other believers coming to your home, then okay, you can crack an egg, right? That's not the point here. Sabbath was made for the man, not man for the Sabbath. So he stretched out his hand, and Jesus healed him. So that's a lot to think on, right? So hopefully you enjoyed that reading. Hopefully you're going to start digging in and start praying and saying, yeah, some of these upside down paradoxical promises of Jesus that if you take up the extra yoke of having him as your Lord, you end up with a lighter burden. And when you give up time to him as he demands from the Sabbath, that it actually gives you rest, and it's a gift from him to take up those extra demands. So hopefully you can ponder that in the week and enjoy. So God bless.